One of the AFL's most prestigious clubs, Hawthorn, is facing disturbing allegations this morning relating to its treatment of First Nations players. And a warning, this story contains details of self-harm, pregnancy loss and intergenerational trauma for First Nations people. Tony has all of the details.
Thanks, Mads. The ABC has learned that an external review commissioned by the club has accused Hawthorn of separating First Nations players from their families and pressuring one couple to terminate a pregnancy. The ABC has spoken to 3 First Nations players and their families who allege the club bullied and separated families over a decade during the reign of 4-time premiership coach Alastair Clarkson. It's understood the review places Clarkson, who recently signed with North Melbourne, and the current Brisbane coach, Chris Fagan, at the centre of some of the allegations. These are live pictures from the Hawks HQ in Melbourne. Let's get more on this and bring in the ABC's national sport reporter, David Mark. David, good morning to you. Can you please outline these concerning allegations?
Yeah, Tony, look, as you said, the ABC has spoken to 3 former Hawthorn players, all First Nation players, and their partners about the allegations that they've raised about the behaviour of the Hawthorn Football Club under the tenure of Alastair Clarkson, who, of course, is the fabled coach at Hawthorn, who won 4 premierships for the club. And the Hawthorn Football Club, which brands itself on being the family club, those players say that brand, if anything, is a misnomer, at least in their case. The players all allege in one form or another that the club tried to separate the First Nations families, and in some cases actually they allege forcibly removed a player from his partner in one case for up to 5 months. The stories are all different, but they all relate to the fact that the club was, they allege, trying to discourage these families from staying together, to remove the men and the women. In one case, a player alleges the club asked him to ask his partner to terminate her pregnancy. The allegations relate to Alastair Clarkson, who, as we've said, is a fabled coach at the club, who's recently signed a deal with North Melbourne. Chris Fagan, who was then head of coaching at Hawthorn and is now coaching the Brisbane Lions, took them to a preliminary final. And they also, the players allege that it involved Jason Burt, who was the player development manager at Hawthorn for a period of time. The players and their partners all allege that those 3 men were involved to some form or another with the allegations that they're accusing them of.
And David, how did the allegations come to light?
So, Tony, earlier this year, Hawthorn instigated an external review into the treatment of First Nations players at the club, and we understand that involved around 23 players. The review looked at the period that Clarkson was coaching the Hawthorn Football Club. Now, it has to be stressed that the people that the ABC spoke to did not instigate this investigation. In fact, they didn't want it to happen because they said it's brought up a lot of the trauma that they say that they suffered at the time that this was going on. However, once it happened, they decided that they did want to tell their story to a trusted source. That trusted source was ABC investigative reporter Russell Jackson, who has written, who interviewed the players, their partners, and has written about the story this morning on the ABC online website. So that's what's happened. The review has been done. It's been in the hands of Hawthorn for 2 weeks. It's now also with the AFL Integrity Department, who we understand have had it for around 10 days.
And what responses have we had from the parties involved, Hawthorn, the coaches and the AFL?
So obviously we put questions to all the parties involved, that is Alastair Clarkson, Chris Fagan and Jason Burt. We sent them some detailed questions. It gave them a day or so to respond. None of those men have responded to the allegations. The AFL put out a statement saying that they recently received a document from the Hawthorn Football Club outlining very serious allegations. It says the experience outlined in the document are extremely serious and require further and full examination. The AFL says it's finalising a process to investigate the allegations and has sought further details from those who shared their experience in the process. The Hawthorn Football Club, we gave them a series of questions. They also put out a statement to say this important work has raised disturbing historical allegations that require further investigation.
And I guess, David, the question now is, what happens? Where do we go from here?
Well, let's put this in some kind of context, Tony. It's grand final week. It's the biggest week of the year for the AFL. This is a huge story. These allegations raised are very serious, as both the AFL and the Hawthorn Football Club have outlined, and so this story is now going to dominate the AFL news agenda for some time. There's also obvious questions about the nature of the investigation that's going to happen. Both Hawthorn and the AFL say there needs to be investigation. The AFL has said that it's putting those processes in place. So we need to know a little bit more about how that investigation will take place and exactly what parameters there are. But there's also a broader context to this, Tony, and that is that quite a number of clubs now have had issues raised about the treatment of First Nations players at their club. Today, we've had the revelations that players at Hawthorn have made allegations about the way they were treated at the Hawthorn Football Club. We know that Collingwood had its Do Better report, which raised serious questions about the treatment of First Nations players there. We know that Adelaide Football Club had some serious issues about its treatment of First Nation players when they had that infamous camp. And of course, St Kilda has had its issues around its treatment of First Nations players, in particular with Robbie Muir. That's 4 clubs. We don't know how many other clubs have had issues that need to be examined. And so the question could be asked today. Gillan McLachlan is doing a press conference this morning at 10:30. He will, of course, be asked questions about this story, but it would not be unexpected if journalists were to ask Gillan McLachlan whether there needs to be a broad-scale review into all AFL clubs to ask them to conduct an examination about their treatment of First Nations players, because as we've had in all of these instances, we've had these revelations come, we've had clubs and the AFL go into crisis management mode and deal with each issue as they come. But the question needs to be asked, does there need to be a broader review into the treatment of First Nations players? And I expect Gillan McLachlan will be asked that question today.
David, thank you for that update on this pretty serious allegation. We'll be following all of this across the morning and continue to bring you updates as we get them.